You know, every army has its elite units, special forces, Top Gun pilots. But what if a nation's most powerful soldiers weren't the ones with the biggest guns, but the ones with the most powerful minds? So today, we're going to dive into the story of Talpiot, a super secretive Israeli program that has had this incredible impact, not just on the battlefield, but on the whole world of technology we live in today.
Okay, let's get right into it. First off, you gotta completely reframe what you think an elite soldier is. Forget the front lines for a minute. See, the soldiers in this unit, they're fighting a totally different kind of war. Their battlefield is all up here. It's knowledge, it's creativity, and it's pure technological innovation.
I mean, that sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? When you picture the best of the best, you probably think of commandos, pilots, the tip of the spear. But in Israel, you could make a really strong case that the true elite, the real game changers, are a small group of young geniuses picked for a very, very different kind of mission.
And that's the real question here, isn't it? Why? Why would a country, literally surrounded by threats, decide that its greatest weapon wasn't a new tank or a faster jet, but a handful of teenagers who were just really good at physics and math? To get that, we need to understand what Talpiot even is.
Okay, so here's the deal. Talpiot basically goes out and finds the absolute brightest kids in the country, but not to fight. They're there to get an intense, fast-tracked university education while they're in the military. And the catch? They have to sign on the dotted line for a full decade of service. The whole point is to make sure Israel always has a technological advantage over enemies that are way bigger than them. But an idea this radical, it doesn't just pop up out of thin air. No, it had to be forged in fire in a moment of absolute national crisis.
So let's rewind the clock to 1973. For Israel, the past 6 years since their big victory in the '67 war, well, they were feeling pretty good about themselves, maybe a little too good. And that confidence was about to get shattered in the worst way possible.
So picture this. It's October 6th, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year. The whole country is basically shut down. It's quiet. And then, at 2 in the afternoon, bam! Air raid sirens are wailing everywhere. Egypt and Syria had launched a perfectly coordinated surprise attack. The first 48 hours were just pure chaos. The army was caught flat-footed, the leadership was in shock, and the country was in a tailspin.
And the human cost, it was just staggering. In only 3 weeks, Israel lost more than 2,600 soldiers. For a tiny country like Israel, this was a national trauma, a deep, deep wound that would scar them for generations. But the reason it was so bad wasn't just the surprise, it was a massive technological shock.
I mean, just look at these numbers. This shows you how catastrophic it was for Israel's whole defense strategy. They relied on their tanks and their air force to be invincible. But in a single day, one day, they lost 2/3 of their tanks in the Sinai. Gone. By the end of the war, 1/5 of their air force was destroyed. Everything they relied on was just being picked apart. So how?
Well, they were up against brand new, top-of-the-line Soviet weapons. Egyptian soldiers had these portable anti-tank missiles that let them hide in the sand and just take out an Israeli tank from over a mile away. Can you imagine? And in the sky, these advanced surface-to-air missiles, which were so huge and effective they called them flying telephone poles, basically grounded the Israeli Air Force. The tech that made them feel invincible, it was suddenly obsolete.
This quote, wow. It says everything you need to know about how desperate things felt. When the defense minister, Moshe Dayan, says the third temple, he's talking about the modern state of Israel itself. Just one day into the war, the leadership genuinely believed they were about to be wiped off the map. It was a crisis of existence, and it demanded a completely new way of thinking to survive.
But, it's out of those ashes that a new idea started to form. It was crystal clear that just having more tanks or more planes was never going to be enough. They needed a new kind of weapon, an edge that couldn't just be bought or copied by their enemies.
And this idea, it didn't come from a general in a war room. It came from 2 university physics professors, Felix Dothan and Shaul Yatziv. They watched this national disaster happen, and they figured the answer wasn't better hardware, it was better software, the human brain. They pitched a total shift in how Israel thought about defense. This really breaks it down. The old way, was a numbers game, just having more stuff, more tanks, more planes. And for a small country like Israel, that's a game you're destined to lose eventually. The new idea was totally different. It was all about creating a qualitative edge, brains over brawn. The goal was to build a small group of superthinkers who could create technologies so far ahead of the curve that no one could ever catch up.
And this quote from their original proposal, this is the key. They believe that real, game-changing, breakthrough creativity, it hits its peak when you're young, in your late teens and early 20s. So they basically went to the army and said, hey, your most valuable asset isn't your experienced generals. It's these 18-year-old kids, if you can find the right ones.
So that's the next big question, right? If you need a squad of geniuses, where on earth do you even start looking? Well, the selection process they came up with had to be just as creative as the program itself.
It's this insane, multi-stage gauntlet. First, they scout the top science students from all over the country. The ones who pass that get hit with a battery of advanced tests in physics, math, and problem solving. Then comes the legendary panel interview. Just try to picture that. You're 17 years old in a room with a dozen high-ranking officers and top scientists, and they're just firing questions at you. Finally, they stick you in a group to see how you handle pressure, how you lead, how you work with others. They're not just looking for smarts, they're looking for the total package. They're looking for leaders.
And this is a classic example of the kind of question they ask. Look, they obviously don't care if you get the right number. They want to see how you think. How do you break down a problem that seems totally impossible? How do you reason and explain yourself when you're under a microscope? It's a test of your mental poise under fire, really.
Okay, so you survive this crazy selection process. You go through years of super intense training. What's the result? What's the payoff? Well, the impact of this one tiny program has been nothing short of revolutionary.
The impact is huge, and it's twofold. In the military, these grads are the brains behind things like the Iron Dome missile defense system. You've all heard of that. But what's maybe even crazier is what happens after their military service. These graduates, with their training and their incredible network, go on to found some of Israel's most successful tech companies. They're pretty much the engine that powered the whole startup nation phenomenon, creating a high-tech economy from scratch.
Seriously, think about it. The cybersecurity that protects your bank account, the advanced medical devices in our hospitals, even the cloud storage we all use every day. A lot of that foundational innovation can be traced right back to this small group of people. Their impact is literally everywhere, often in ways you'd never even guess.
So, when you boil it all down, the story of Talpiot is about a nation that, when its back was against the wall, decided to rearm itself. Not with bigger weapons, but with a more powerful idea. The idea that in a world that's always changing, the only real, sustainable advantage you can have is the creativity locked inside the human mind.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought, doesn't it? The Talpiot program, sure, it's an extreme example from an extreme situation. But it makes you wonder, right? For any company, any organization, any country, what's the real, untapped power of going all in on your brightest, most creative young people? What could they really do if we just gave them the chance?